Kale Ronan hit the mat with a brutal thud, the kind that vibrated straight through his spine and settled in his skull like a headache with a grudge. His lungs fought to pull in air while his ribs ached from the impact, but this wasn't new to him anymore. In fact, getting thrown around like a ragdoll by Commander Alira Voss had almost become a regular part of his day. Not that it made it easier. Just familiar in the worst way next to him, Sira Ven groaned as she hit the mat with a clumsy sprawl that left her cheek pressed against the cold floor. To Kale's right, Torrin Blake was curled into a ball, both arms wrapped tightly around his midsection like he was trying to hold his insides in. Dax Kor lay flat on his back, staring blankly at the ceiling like he was halfway through negotiating with death. Marek Elshin, ever the proud one, was the only one who still looked like he had any shred of dignity left, though even he was on all fours, coughing and struggling to breathe. And then there was Joran Vale, who hadn't learned his lesson yet, was pushing himself back up, already moving toward Alira, again with the same stubborn fire Kale both admired and pitied. His arm drew back, his punch aimed straight for her helmet. She didn't even flinch. With terrifying ease, Alira raised one armored forearm and swatted the attack aside like it was nothing. Then, in a blur Kale couldn't fully follow, she spun around, swept Joran's feet out from under him, grabbed him by the collar mid-air, and slammed him flat onto the mat hard enough that the sound echoed through the entire chamber. Again, she said, her voice sharp and cold, and completely unbothered as she stood back in the center of the training mat, waiting for her 6 victims to drag themselves upright and try again. "I feel like I'm actually going to die this time, sir," Sira muttered into the floor, her arms too shaky to lift her up. "That would be a mercy," Kale answered as he rolled to one side, then pushed himself up onto one knee, trying not to groan too loudly. "Come on. If we've got time to complain, we've got time to stand. On your feet, Unit Claw," Alira bellowed, her arms folded across her chest, like she was personally disappointed that none of them had turned into gods yet. Kale sucked in a breath and stood, his joints popping in protest. Marek rose next, quiet but steady, followed by Dax and Sira, who wobbled but managed to stand. Torrin, however, was still lying on his back, groaning like a wounded opera singer. And Joran, well, Joran was barely moving after that last slam. He'd need a minute. It didn't matter to Alira. "You fight like I'm the finish line," she said, voice hard as steel. "But I'm the storm that drowns you before the race even begins. If you ever think you're close to landing a hit, it's because I let you believe that. You're not here to try. You're here to become something that can survive me." Ever since their operations on Kavros, Prime had wrapped up, and Kale's responsibilities had been handed off to administrators. Alira had taken every opportunity to drag them back into training. Brutal, unrelenting, almost sadistic training. Their little squad had grown too. The original 4, Kale, Sira, Dax, and Marek, now included Torrin Blake, the loudmouth who couldn't shut up about his expensive shoes, and Joran Vale, the Marine who had somehow earned Alira's twisted version of approval. The rules of the exercise were simple. Land a clean hit on her face, not the armor. Her face. No weapons, no gear. Just you, your limbs, and whatever suicidal urge pushed you to try again after the first time. She nearly broke your collarbone. They had tried rushing her all at once. They had tried from different angles. They had tried bait and switch, timing tricks, desperation swipes, and rage-fueled flurries. None of it worked. Kale was still rubbing his shoulder from the last attempt, where she had somehow redirected his entire momentum into Marek, resulting in both of them flying across the room like bowling pins. Alira didn't fight like a person. She fought like a law of nature. And worse, she was enjoying this. She wasn't cruel for the sake of it, or so she claimed. But Kale couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, deep inside, she fed off this. Off their pain, off their effort, off watching them fail, sweat, bleed, and crawl their way back to their feet. She hadn't removed her helmet once, hadn't broken a sweat, hadn't been touched. Not once, in over a dozen sessions, they had yet to get even a graze in, and yet, as Kale looked around at his team, something clicked. Something small, like a whisper in the back of his mind. Not an answer, just the suggestion that maybe, just maybe, they'd been doing it wrong this entire time. Not because they weren't strong enough, but because they weren't fighting together. Not truly. He glanced at Sira. She caught his look and raised an eyebrow. Dax saw it too. Marek didn't need to be told. They'd all been trying to win the fight as individuals, maybe. It was time they fought like a unit. Kale didn't speak his thought out loud, not right away. He just stood there for a moment, hands aching, ribs sore, watching Commander Elira Voss as she circled the mat like a wolf among broken sheep. She wasn't even tired. Her breathing hadn't changed since the start. Her armor gleamed under the harsh white lights. Not a dent on it, not a single scratch. Whatever fire was inside her never dimmed. It only waited for the next excuse to burn. They couldn't beat her like this. Not individually. That much was obvious now. She was watching them, not for mistakes in form or strength, but for the moments. They broke formation when their thoughts turned inward and they stopped fighting together. That was when she struck. Every time. Without fail. "We're not getting through like this," Kale said quietly, just loud enough for the others to hear, as they regrouped near the edge of the mat. "She's reading us before we even move. We're fighting 6 different battles in the same room. So what? We're supposed to do synchronized dancing now?" Dax muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "No," Kale said, and looked at Joran, who was finally pushing himself upright with a wince. "We pick a leader. One of us calls the shots. The rest follow. No hesitation, no freelancing. We move as one. Let me guess, you want to be the hero?" Torin asked. His sarcasm dulled by the way he was still holding his rib scale shook his head. "Joran leads the charge. He's the only one who's kept getting up without being told. That counts for something." Joran blinked, surprised, then stood up straighter, despite the bruises painting his arms. "You sure? You earned it," Kale said simply. "You go in first. Marek and I follow. Dax, you fake left. Sira, you sweep wide. Torin, distract her. Be loud. That part you're good at." "Wow," Torin said dryly. "I feel honored." Sira smirked and cracked her knuckles. "Let's see what happens. Worst case, we end up back on the mat with new bruises in interesting shapes." Kale gave them all a look, serious, steady, the kind of look that asked for trust without demanding it. "Follow the pattern. Eyes on Joran. Time it right. We hit her like a storm she can't predict." Elira stood at the center again, arms folded. She watched them approach without a flicker of concern. "All of you at once again?" She called out. "Didn't learn the first 5 times?" Joran didn't answer. He launched forward with explosive speed, aiming high. Elira moved to counter, raising her arm. But this time, Marek came in low from the side, drawing her balance. Slightly off. Kale moved with him, mirroring Joran's step from the opposite direction. Dax darted left, just as planned, while Sira swept around to flank. Torin, to his credit, started yelling nonsense about how she owed him money for his spine for the first time. Elira didn't counter. She reacted. Her posture changed. She went on the defensive as Joran swung wide, drawing her focus. Elira blocked him, but in that same breath, Kale stepped in from the blind angle, just 1 heartbeat later than her shift. He didn't go for the helmet this time. He let the rhythm guide him, Marek's momentum pushed her back half a step. That was all the space he needed. Kale pulled his arm back, coiled tight, and drove his fist straight across the side of her helmet. Near the exposed cheek plate, impact cracked through his knuckles like shattering glass. Pain roared up his arm, screaming through nerves and bone. Something gave way inside his hand, something important, but it didn't matter. Not right then, because Alira stumbled only half a step. But she did, and then silence her head turned slowly, that polished helmet catching the light like a mirror of judgment. Kale was already sinking to one knee, cradling his hand, breath short and sharp as fire stabbed up his arm. Nobody moved. Even Torin had gone quiet. Alira stared at him, unreadable, then reached up and unclipped her helmet with a slow, deliberate motion. It hissed as it released, and for the first time they saw her face. No bruises, no blood, but her cheek was slightly red, a faint mark blooming where Kale had struck her. Not enough to hurt her, just enough to prove it happened. You broke your hand, she said simply, looking down at him. Kale gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face. Yeah, but I hit you. Alira paused, and then in the smallest shift of expression, she smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't soft, but it was real. That, she said, was the first smart thing you've done. All week. Kale chuckled, then hissed and bent over as the pain flared again. I try to pace myself. She turned her gaze to the rest of them. Well then, Unit Obsidian Claw, congratulations. You've finally earned your name. There were no cheers. Just exhaustion and silent pride, the kind that only came from knowing you survived something no one expected you to live through. Kale had felt pain before. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulders, concussions that made time skip like a scratched vid file. But this was different. His hand wasn't just hurting. It was pulsing like a second heart, each throb reminding him that bones didn't forgive stupidity. Even if the mission had worked, they brought him to the Virelians' medbay immediately after training. Not in a stretcher, but clothes. Joran had insisted on helping him walk, though Kale was pretty sure he'd been leaning on Joran more than he cared to admit. The medbay smelled like sterile chemicals and humming electronics. White lights buzzed above, too clean, too bright. Teams spread out around the room, collapsing onto padded benches and breathing like they had just barely escaped the planet on fire. Sira had a bloodied lip. Dax was icing his knee with a pack someone had begged off a nurse. Torin had gone quiet for once, which probably meant he'd bitten his tongue, or his pride, or Boda. Tall figure entered through the side door with what Kale could only describe as enthusiastic chaos. Tivo Vrel, the alien engineer with a feathered head, 6 glossy eyes, and the enthusiasm of a caffeinated toddler, clapped his hands together and clicked his beak twice as he approached. Ooh, Kale. What did you punch this time? A tank? A wall? Commander Voss? Kale looked up slowly. Option 3. Wouldn't recommend it. You are lucky your bones are so basic, Tivo said, already prepping tools that glowed and vibrated in colors. Kale had never seen used in medicine before. If you had Varkari anatomy, your hand would have exploded into jelly. But this is just a mess. A lovely, classic, very human mess. Kale raised an eyebrow. That's your version of comfort? Of course, Tivo chirped. I could do horror instead, but the mood doesn't call for it. Behind him, Zeelan entered, his assistant, quieter, more grounded, and far less thrilled to be surrounded by injured humans. She glanced at Kale's hand and muttered something. In her native language, it sounded both judgmental and impressed. Tivo gestured toward the table. Sit, or lie down, or hover, if that's your thing. I won't judge. Just hold very still while I rearrange your hand's entire architecture. That doesn't sound terrifying at all, Kale muttered, climbing onto the medical bed with a wince. The rest of the team leaned in to watch, grimy and bruised but curious. Even Torin seemed oddly invested. TiVo extended a long needle with a soft buzzing tip, aimed it at Kale's wrist, and said, "This will feel like someone is tickling your bones with lightning. Try not to scream too loud. It bothers Zealand." "I never scream," Kale said, already regretting the bravado. 3 seconds later, he was gripping the edge of the bed with his good hand, eyes wide, mouth clenched shut as waves of nerve fire danced up his arm. It wasn't just pain. It was weird. Pain. Alien pain. A kind of pain that felt like it didn't belong in his body at all, like someone had inserted a foreign language into his nerves. Syrah grimaced. "We should have made him bite down on something. I have a belt," Dax offered. "Save it." Kale growled, teeth grinding. "I'm fine." TiVo chirped again, happy as ever. "You say that, but your brain is firing panic signals like a disco party. Fascinating, really. Human pain thresholds are so dramatic. Eventually, the buzzing stopped." TiVo withdrew the device, inspected Kale's hand with all 6 of his eyes, then nodded. Fractures realigned, tendons reinforced, microfibers stimulated for rapid healing. "You'll be sore, but usable. Try not to punch armored warlords for at least 72 hours. Kale flexed his fingers, wincing at the sharp pull, but amazed that he could move them at all. "I'll add that to my list of regrets." "You say that now," TiVo said, patting him on the shoulder, "but the data I gathered from your injury is going to help me finish the new enhancements. You've just contributed to science through violence. Very noble of you." "Happy to help," Kale muttered, slumping back against the pillow as his body started to relax for the first time all day across the room. The others were starting to talk again. Quiet laughter, teasing, bruised egos being wrapped in sarcasm and half-serious praise. The kind of sounds Kale hadn't heard from them in weeks, not since before the war, not since they stopped being just pilots and started becoming something else. He looked over at them, one by one. Joran, now respected. Syrah, still grinning through the ache. Dax and Marek, calm and thoughtful as always. Torin with his endless commentary, and yet still standing. They weren't perfect. Not yet, but today they had done something no one expected them to do. They had moved as one. They followed the quiet hallway with no idea where it was leading them, still sore from training and half-dazed from the medbay's alien anesthesia. Kale trailed behind Marshal Halvik, the old soldier whose presence always felt like someone had carved loyalty out of stone and given it a voice. No one asked questions, not even Torin, which meant the silence had weight. Something was coming, and Halvik was the kind of man who didn't waste time with explanations. He walked like the corridor owed him a favor, and the doors ahead opened. Before he even raised a hand, the room they entered wasn't a briefing room or another training area. It was wide, gleaming, and quiet in a way that felt reverent. Walls of dark metal arced upward into a dome, the lights dimmed low like dusk in orbit. On either side stood reinforced doors with individual access panels. Beds were built into the walls, not barrack-style bunks, but real beds, private, clean, personalized, the kind of space officers got, not grunt-scale. Stopped at the center of the room, unsure whether to speak first. Halvik glanced back at them all. "Congratulations. Welcome to your new quarters." Dax blinked. "Wait, seriously?" Syrah stepped forward, running her fingers along one of the curved bed edges. "You mean this isn't a dream where I wake up face down in the hangar again?" Halvik didn't smile, but his voice carried a rare softness. "Commander Voss made the request herself. Said anyone who manages to land a clean hit on her earns more than a medal. She was impressed." "I broke my hand," Kale muttered. Though a small grin tugged at the edge of his mouth, she noticed Halvik said. Then he turned toward a sealed wall panel that hissed open, revealing a long bench lined with 6 sets of new armor, dark, sleek, edged with silver trim and reinforced plating that looked both heavy and agile. Not mass-issued gear. Custom forged, fit to their Formstorin stepped toward it like he was approaching a shrine. Is this real? Did someone finally recognize my fashion sense? Your armor has extra shoulder support, Halvik said flatly. Your complaints about your previous set were recorded. Torin looked genuinely touched. I feel seen. Kale moved to the armor closest to him. The breastplate bore a mark he hadn't seen before. A black insignia shaped like a wolf's head, fangs bared, eyes narrow, cut into the metal like it had always belonged there. Unit Obsidian Claw, Halvik said. That's your new designation. From here on, your unit reports directly to High Command. You'll be field tested, monitored, evaluated, and if you keep performing like this, you'll be the model for elite pilot squad hybrid formations moving forward. Kale stared at the insignia and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just recognition. This was a responsibility. A chance to build something that didn't just end with him. Sira looked over at him. This is real, isn't it? Kale nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. Halvik's voice grew more formal. Ronan stepped forward. Kale did. You'll serve as field commander, tactical lead. The rest follow your direction, unless orders come from someone above me or Voss herself. Understood? Yes, sir, Kale said, squaring his shoulders despite the ache that still lingered in every muscle. And one more thing, Halvik added, reaching into a small side compartment near the armor rack. He pulled out a black pilot helmet, visor, dark, smooth as glass, with the same wolf emblem etched into its crown. This one's yours. Sira had a hand in its specs. Said you always settle for the leftovers. Kale looked at her, eyebrows raised. Sira shrugged. Don't read into it. I just got tired of watching you fly with a cracked HUD and duct tape. He held the helmet carefully, as if it might vanish. If he blinked too hard. Then he turned to Sira and extended it toward her instead. You should wear it, he said. You're the reason we held formation. You saw it first. The timing, the angle. I just followed through. Sira hesitated, caught. Off guard. Kale. He smiled at her. Not wide, not performative, just sincere. We're not here to build heroes. We're here to build something better. She took the helmet, stunned silent for once. Her fingers tracing the emblem behind them, Joran stepped forward and stood at attention, arms at his sides, eyes fixed ahead. With respect, sir, I'd like to pledge myself to this unit. Fully. No transfer requests. No reassignment. I came aboard thinking I'd be guarding a hallway. Now I want to earn that wolf. Kale looked at him, then glanced at Halvik. Marshall nodded. He's yours if you want him. I do. Kale said. Torin raised a hand. Are we pledging now? Because I'd like to officially swear loyalty to anyone who gives me gear this shiny. Everyone chuckled. The moment finally easing into something lighter. Kale let the sound wash over him, then turned back toward the armor. This was what he had imagined. Not medals, not ranks. Legacy A-team that didn't just follow orders, but believed in the mission. People who grew stronger together instead of apart. And for the first time since the war began, he didn't feel like he was holding on to a dream that only made sense in his own head. They saw it too, and they were ready to build it with him. The royal suite aboard the Virelian wasn't loud or overly decorated, like most assumed a command-level space would be. Instead, it was warm, layered in soft gold lighting and deep polished metal. It smelled faintly of citrus, freshly brewed, herbs, and something sweet that clung to the air like a memory of Spring Lady Aries Selene sat near the wide view wall, her legs crossed under a silk shawl, sipping slowly from a tall glass of guava juice, chilled just below freezing. Her long blonde hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her usual diplomatic calm was replaced with something quieter, the way people look when their mind is 5 levels deeper than the room they're in across from her, seated cross-legged. And bouncing with barely contained energy was Thibaut Vrel, still wrapped in his engineering robes, feathers fluffed, goggles hanging off one horned earplate. Beside him, leaning on the side wall in full armor, arms folded, stood Commander Alira. Voss, silent and sharp as ever. She hadn't removed her helmet since arriving. She rarely did unless something was truly personal. "You know," Thibaut said, as he dipped a claw into a small bowl of candied fruit, "you humans talk a lot about sweetness like it's a virtue. But this guava thing? It tastes like you mixed a flower with regret. I mean that in the most complimentary way possible." Iris smiled without looking at him. "You always find the most peculiar way to describe something you seem to enjoy eating." "Oh, I enjoy plenty of things that confuse." Thibaut said brightly. "It's one of my best traits." Alira shifted, just slightly. The kind of move she made when she was about to say something, but decided to let silence speak instead. "I need your eyes on something," Iris said, placing her glass down and reaching for the sleek datapad beside her. Her tone shifted, a slow, deliberate slide into the voice of command. "Something that came across my secure channel this morning. I haven't shared it with High Command yet." Thibaut sat straighter, one eye narrowing with focus. "Something sensitive?" Iris handed him the datapad. "Something troubling, from inside the Dominion's border. Unverified, but disturbing." He took it carefully, turning the screen with 2 hands. His eyes scanned the footage, a low quality recording of what looked like a dark room, flickering with artificial light. A man knelt on the floor, hands bound behind him, bruises on his face. A voice from off-screen gave no name, no affiliation, just accusations and charges that sounded official, followed by a sudden, silent movement. A silver wire flashed. The man fell over dead. Thibaut didn't speak for a moment. He tapped the screen, back to repeat the kill frame, then again, then again. Each time slower. "This technique," he muttered, "this isn't Dominion. And it's not Varkari. That wire, the drop. They've used this before. Quiet, no sound, no trace, instant, precise." Iris folded her arms and leaned forward. "So you've seen this before?" Thibaut's eyes didn't leave the screen. "Not personally, but I've studied them. The Obsidian Pact. Their elite operatives train in techniques like this. Execution by silkwire. It's clean. It's theatrical. They believe death should make a statement without a mess." Alira spoke for the first time, her voice low and hard. "And what does that statement say?" Thibaut finally looked up. "It says the person who ordered this didn't want to scare someone. They wanted to remind someone. This wasn't punishment. It was a message." Iris didn't move. She just stared past both of them, out into the stars beyond the glass. "That man was one of my brother's senior informants," she said after a pause. "He had access to records tied to the border colony transfers. He disappeared 3 days ago. This arrived this morning through a military channel we believed was clean." Alira's hands clenched behind her back. "If the Pact's involved, it means more than just surveillance. They're moving people inside our lines. Or they've already done it. I can't prove anything yet," Iris said, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed something deeper. "But if they've started using execution signatures from the inside, it means someone in our ranks is allowing it. Or worse, requesting it." Thibaut set the pad down slowly, all trace of humor gone. "If this is what I think it is, then you're not just dealing with infiltration. You're dealing with an agent. One who's already embedded, already trusted." Someone who's read the maps and memorized the codes and knows which doors don't squeak when they open. The room settled into silence again, the kind that thickens. Rather than fades, Ares picked her glass back up, took a slow sip, and finally said, "I need to know how deep this goes." Quietly, no loud alerts, no suspicion, just answers. Tivo nodded once. "I'll start pulling threads, but be careful who you let see you thinking. The kind of people who operate like this, they're always watching the smart ones first." Illyra stepped forward, finally removing her helmet and setting it down beside the datapad. Her eyes met Ares's without blinking. "If someone's already inside," she said, "then we've been playing their game for longer than we realize." Ares nodded once, and the glass trembled slightly in her hand, but she didn't let go Tivo's. Claws danced across the hollow interface in front of him, the glowing grid responding to his gestures with gentle pulses of light. He had requested access to Dominion military death records from the past 2 months, and Ares had quietly authorized it. Now, sitting in a dim-side chamber adjacent to her quarters, the air still tasted faintly of guava, and something far colder underneath Illyra stood by the door like a shadow given purpose, arms folded, gaze sharp enough to wound. She hadn't spoken in minutes, and Ares hadn't asked her to. Illyra's silence was its own kind of conversation. "It's subtle," Tivo said, narrowing his lower eyes as the screen displayed a series of still images. "But there's a pattern if you look close enough. These aren't just isolated cases. All of them involve informants, mostly low-level. All dead within 72 hours of contact with high-clearance military networks. No official autopsy. Cause listed as internal trauma or collapse. But look here." He zoomed in on a photo. The neck of a young man, bruised at an angle that didn't fit with the story of a fall. No blood, no mess. Just stillness that looked too clean to be accidental. "This is the Obsidian Pack's work," Tivo said. "They've used this method for decades. The silk wire is custom woven from their own synthetic fibers. It dissolves under light in less than 20 seconds. By the time a body is found, nothing remains but the bruising pattern and a missing breath." Ares leaned in, arms crossed over her chest, brows drawn tight. "Are they targeting our intelligence system, or just leaving us blind one piece at a time?" Tivo hesitated. "That depends on how many of them are already here. Because if this many low-tier operatives are being eliminated, it means one of 2 things. Either someone's doing cleanup because they're moving up the ladder, or someone high up already has control, and they're cutting every loose thread." Illyra stepped forward, her tone clipped. "You're suggesting an embedded operative in upper command?" "I'm suggesting," Tivo said carefully, "that this doesn't feel like a probe anymore. It feels like a purge. And purges only happen when someone wants silence before something big." Ares didn't blink. "And you believe it's the Pact?" "I would bet my second heart on it," Tivo said. "They've done this before, in the Karanith sector. Took out a governing cell in 5 days. Not with armies, with fear, with suggestion, with silence. That's their weapon. They make you afraid to trust anyone until you're too paralyzed to act." Illyra's jaw tightened. "Then we act before they reach that stage." Ares turned away from both of them, pacing slowly toward the window, overlooking the deep stretch of stars beyond the fleet. The warships moved like drifting wolves, silent, patient. She rested one hand against the glass. "My brother thinks this is still a border dispute," she said softly. "He sees it in terms of trade lines, resource rights, and public support. But if there's a shadow agent inside the Dominion itself, that's not a conflict. That's a setup." Illyra's voice dropped low. "Have you considered the possibility that the agent isn't targeting you, but using you as cover to get closer to him?" Ares didn't answer right away. The silence was heavy again, not from fear, but from acknowledgement. The kind of quiet that happens when someone stops denying what they already knew. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting Alira's. Then we need to change the game. If they're watching me, then let them watch. I'll be the bait. You'll be the blade. Tivo opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't usually hesitate, but now his eyes shifted in a way that meant he wasn't sure how much further he wanted to go. I've seen their playbook, he said at last, but there's one piece they don't always use unless they're serious. They send in what they call a silent mind. An elite, someone who doesn't just follow orders. They guide the chaos from the inside. They make people turn against each other. They plant doubts. They don't have a face. They just appear where pressure is about to break. Aeris narrowed her eyes. And you think that's already happened? I think, Tivo said, we wouldn't be seeing clean executions and false narratives if this was a scout mission. This is strategic. Whoever's behind this knows where we're soft, and they're pressing just hard enough not to trigger alarms, just enough to guide us without being seen. Alira moved toward the datapad again. Do we know what this silent mind looks like? A name? A history? Anything? Tivo shook his head. No files. No images. They don't record them. Only other pact agents even know they exist. Some say they're just myth, a ghost story to keep their own people in line. But every now and then, something happens. A movement collapses from the inside. A fleet changes course at the last second, and then nothing. No trace. Just silence and a shift in momentum that never makes sense until it's too late. Ares finally sat down again, setting her glass aside, her hands clasped in her lap. I need to know if this ghost is inside my walls, she said. And I need to know before it starts whispering in my brother's ear. Tivo met her gaze. All humor gone, every inch of him focused. And I'll start pulling at shadows, he said. And if one of them flinches, we'll know it's real. Alira stepped closer to Ares, voice quiet but firm. You're not facing this alone. I know, Ares said, her voice soft but steady. That's why it scares me a little less.